Greetings, Facebook. My name is Trae Strickland. I'm a seventh grader at Dublin Middle School. Dublin, I bet you didn't know the whole story why the southern state seceded from the Union. There were a series of events that finally peaked when Republican Party candidate Abraham Lincoln won the presidency in 1860. Prior to that, there was a mutual economic and social feud between the North and the South. On top of that, a bitter conflict stopping the expansion of slavery into the new territories. Southern states were claiming violations of states' rights by the federal government. Also, the abolitionist movement was gaining momentum nationally on the morality of slavery. All these issues were challenging the southern states' social, economic, and political preferences, in which all was dependent on the institution of slavery. They doubled down in defiance and distrust of the American government. They planned to separate from the Union to form another country, which was to be the Confederate States of America. The earliest beef the southern states had politically was the passing of the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Following the Louisiana Purchase, Missouri was a new state in 1820, and there was an intense debate on whether it was going to be a slave or a free state. To keep a balance of power, a compromise was made that Missouri would be a slave state. Maine was admitted as a free state from the Northern Territory. That made 12 slave states and 12 free states. But Congress included in the compromise a resolution to restrict the slave industry to south of Missouri at longitude 3630. You can see here on the map. Well, that compromise became a problem after the Mexican-American War of 1846 throughout 48. The United States won the battle and acquired new lands in the West that are now New Mexico and California. Southern states had ambitions to expand the slave industry further west. Northern states had no desire for that to happen and applied political restrictions to contain slavery in existing slave states. This caused even greater tension between the North and the South. In Congress, there were threats of war and secession from the South by Senator John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. Senators Daniel Webster of Massachusetts, Henry Clay of Kentucky, and Stephen Douglas of Illinois were able to compose a large bill called the Compromise of 1850. In this historical piece of legislation, there were 5 bills in the compromise to address several heated political problems during that time. The first bill was to appease Northerners who did not want slavery in the West. California was admitted as a free state. The second bill was to appease Southerners. A stronger fugitive slave law was passed that will be enforced by the federal government. The third bill will be the tipping point for the Civil War. A few years later, the policy of popular sovereignty. The ideal of popular sovereignty was to allow citizens living in a territory to decide if they wanted to be free or slave state. The fourth bill resolved a land dispute with Texans and they gave up some western land to the government. Finally, the fifth bill abolished slave trading in Washington, D.C. It was too embarrassed when foreign dignitaries would come to the Capitol, and there was a slave auction in Town Square. But the bill only abolished the slave trade in Washington, D.C. The Compromise of 1850 laid way for a major national conflict in 1854. The country was aggressively pursuing opportunities of manifest destiny, expansion to the west coast of America. Plans for the railroads through the new territories intrigued both the North and South business interests. The political dilemma was how to expand west without destroying the Compromise of 1820, which restricted the slave industry. In January 1854, Stephen Douglas introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and things got ugly. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was based on popular sovereignty, allowing settlers in new territories to determine if they wanted to be a slave or a free state. North and South competed to send the most settlers into this region. This quickly led to violence, and the territory became known as Bleeding Kansas. The support for popular sovereignty, in combination with the reality of Bleeding Kansas, gave way to the rise of the Republican Party. The party supported tolerance, economic reform, and anti-slavery. In the new territories, Abraham Lincoln was the first candidate to run for president for the Republican Party. The South vowed to secede from the Union if the Republicans ever won the presidency. Abraham Lincoln won by a wide margin, but promised the South not to interfere with slavery in existing slave states. Southern states absolutely did not trust the anti-slavery political ideas of the Republicans. Also, abolitionists was effectively challenging the morality of slavery. The overall anti-slavery social political momentum combined with distrust pressed slave states to rebel against America. December 20th, 1860, South Carolina was the first slave state to officially secede from the United States. Other states followed days after. Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard bombarded Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861, kicking off the Battle of Fort Sumter in the Civil War. And that's the whole story.